Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Mariancho, and these are my quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings for Week 14. It's the last week before the playoffs. It's a must-win for just about everyone. So let's get into it. We're going to start at quarterback, and I think what's probably most important to keep in mind right now is how these players are performing as of late. This is a chart that reveals the last 4 games, quarterback average points per game, and there's a pretty clear outlier. I don't know if you can hear the plane above, but clearly, the player flying above the rest would be Joe Burrow here at 27.8, the clear quarterback one over the last month. And the QB2, which is a kind of a steep drop off, 5 points less, is on bye. That's Lamar Jackson. Next up would be Josh Allen at 22.7, followed by Tua. That's kind of a shocker. Tua's playing lights out since returning from the concussion. But followed by Tua, we have Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes is playing pretty well. And then Jameis Winston, after last week's monster game, does come in here at 19.3. But then 2 players are on bye, Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels. We're missing some good quarterbacks this week. And then these next 2 might surprise you. Caleb Williams at 18.4, followed by Matthew Stafford at 18.1. Stafford, maybe not a big shock, but Caleb really stepping it up, mainly the last 2 games specifically with a new offensive coordinator. But then there's pretty a wide average tier there from 18 to 14 points on average, starting with Anthony Richardson, who is on bye, all the way down to Drake May at 14.7, who's on bye. And some of the names in this list are, Sam Darnold, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, Will Levis. That's kind of shocking. Will Levis almost as good as Herbert lately, but then Derek Carr, Russell Wilson, Jordan Love, Geno Smith, Bryce Young, Drew Lock, Kyler Murray. Kyler's at the bottom of this average tier. And then there's a pretty obvious trickle down following Drake May with Baker Mayfield coming in at 14 points. Baker has not been very good the last month. Then Aaron Rodgers, followed by CJ Stroud, who is on bye. Rough month for him. And then Cooper Rush, Mac Jones, Kirk Cousins, almost dead last, followed by Aiden O'Connell, the last player on the list. So that's the recency bias at the position. If you really want to just look at how they're playing right now, that would be the list of average quarterback players. But this week we do have some advantageous matchups that are unavailable. Most of them that are on bye do rank above average, but maybe not like truly elite. We're missing the Patriots, who are top 10 there at 19.8, followed by Washington, Denver, Baltimore, all above 18 points per game that they give up on average to the position. So let's talk quarterback upgrades. I think this tier from 20 points and up is clearly the matchups you want to chase. However, they're a bit misleading. The players who do benefit are not exactly the most trustworthy candidates overall. The best matchup would be the Bengals, who are a rough defense lately, and that's Cooper Rush this week. I don't know how many people want to trust Cooper Rush, but then it would be Tampa Bay, who match up against the Raiders. So Aiden O'Connell, not a quarterback I trust either. Then it's Jacksonville. Will Levis has been league average the last month, so maybe he gets an upgrade. But then Baker Mayfield can have some redemption here. Finally, a quarterback that, at least on name value, you do trust, does get a top 4 matchup. So I do think Baker's a good start this week, followed by Joe Burrow with a top 5 matchup against Dallas. Burrow's clearly a lock in your lineup. Then Mac Jones will get the start with Trevor Lawrence going on IR against Tennessee. It is a good matchup here. Does rank in the 20-plus point top tier. So those are the upgrades. Then there's the Patriots on bye, and then this next little group is decent, but maybe not as good. 19 to 18 points is the upgrade we would be looking for. And that would be Tua, who goes up against the Jets this week, followed by Darnold against the Falcons, then Jalen Hurts against the Panthers, and then there's the Commanders here on bye at 19 points, and then the last one that might be advantageous would be Justin Herbert getting the Chiefs, who do give up an average of 18.8 points per game. Those next 2 represent the tier break. They're on bye, and then from 17.9 down to roughly 15 points, I would consider that the league average. That is the zone of kind of who cares, but then the bad matchups below 15 points, one of them is on bye, the Texans, but then starting with the worst, the matchup to avoid lately would be Buffalo. However, Brock Purdy's terrible game in the snow is a big factor why this is so much lower than everyone else. So I don't know if I totally buy into a big downgrade for Stafford, but the Bills are technically a difficult matchup. This game is in LA, so snow's not a factor at all. But then Geno Smith on the road at Arizona could be limited. That's a big downgrade. They've been very good on defense lately. And then Jameis Winston didn't play elite football in the snow. While he did get the win, he didn't put up more than 15 points against the Steelers 2 weeks ago. So tough matchup for him. Bottom three, he might be even worse. This game is in Pittsburgh, not in Cleveland. And then Jordan Love did play. He almost connected on a touchdown to Tucker Kraft early in the game, and he only had one total touchdown. That was a bummer. Jordan Love almost came close to 20 points, but not the best game from him. Then Kirk Cousins gets a downgrade as well against the Vikings, followed by Bryce Young against the Eagles, and then Brock Purdy against Chicago. Those are some tough matchups. Then Houston's on bye, and then the last two that maybe you're worried about would be the Rams against Josh Allen, and then the Giants against Derek Carr. But at that point, they're above 15 points. I'm not too worried about them. So those are the quarterback matchups and recency bias in terms of scoring. And now let's get into my rankings. Let's discuss quarterbacks now. And if you didn't skip ahead with the timestamps, then you know this number one quarterback shouldn't shock you at all. It's clearly Joe Burrow, definitely above everyone. A top 5 matchup for him against Dallas, averaging almost 28 points. He is the quarterback one on Monday night. He will be lights out. Number 2, I'm trusting Josh Allen for sure. I think he's the MVP this season. And against the Rams in the afternoon time window, it's almost like a primetime game of definitely a spotlit matchup for the Bills. Josh Allen will definitely be great. Give me Josh Allen at number 2. But I think another difference maker this week would be Jalen Hurts versus the Panthers. And the only reason I didn't rank him at the top is because maybe Saquon really dominates, and perhaps they do bench their starters in the second half. I could see a world where Jalen Hurts takes a seat on the bench and they score like 6 touchdowns and only 2 of them are tied to him. 4 of them could go to other players. So that's the only reason why he's at number 3. But obviously you're starting these 3 quarterbacks. They are the studs at the position right now. But at number 4 in the next tier, I think Tua Tagovailoa is a really hot player right now, the QB4 in points per game, and he gets a top 8 matchup. I would ride the hot hand and trust Tua. I think this game will look kind of similar to that Patriots matchup a couple weeks ago where they did torch that divisional opponent at home. Last week was in Green Bay. Weather's not a factor here. And with Sauce Gardner probably not going to suit up, it doesn't look likely, I think Tua will continue this hot streak. I think he will go over 20 points. I trust Tua a lot. Quarterback 4, trust the recent production. He is playing very well. Number 5 is Baker Mayfield versus Las Vegas, who gets a big upgrade in terms of matchup, top 4 against Las Vegas. And I do trust Mike Evans to really pay off. My only concern with Baker is that Bucky Irving is really playing well. He also gets a decent matchup. And similar to what I mentioned with Hurts, maybe the running backs steal all of the touchdowns from him. But I really doubt it. I do trust Baker, and he's been in a slump. I don't think last week will repeat. I think he'll be a lot better. So Baker, I did rank much lower last week, almost a dozen spots lower. And you guys argued with me in the comment section. I was right to downgrade him. He did not have a good game against the Panthers. In division, that's usually what happens. But against the Raiders, it's not even in the same conference. This is a friendly game, so to speak, between Pirates, and Baker is going to just fire that cannon every single time. So love Baker this week. Definitely a top 5 play. I think he pays off tremendously, well over 20 points. Number 6, I also think Sam Darnold plays lights out this week against the former Vikings quarterback. I think Darnold will earn a massive payday thanks to this game. If they beat Kirk Cousins and he looks overwhelmingly better, Kirk Cousins just got a massive contract from the Falcons. You don't think another team is going to give him a huge contract? At worst, I think he would get Baker Mayfield's deal of 3 years, $100 million, something like that. So Darnold going to be a very productive quarterback this week, a top 10 matchup for him. And I think Kevin O'Connell really dials up a good game plan. So I trust Darnold. Another good thing about this matchup against Atlanta, they're tough against running backs, but not against pass-catching running backs. So Aaron Jones, I think, will be productive thanks to his targets this week that will pad the numbers for Darnold. You know, Jefferson and Addison are also going to go up. I love Darnold this week, a top 6 quarterback, in my opinion, against the Falcons. At number 7, I did tell you to start Jordan Love yesterday, and technically I did rank him at number 6. But since looking into the numbers for Baker Mayfield, I did upgrade Baker over Darnold. And I did rank Darnold over Love yesterday, so that's why Love does move down one spot. But I did tell you to start him. He was in this tier, and if he hit that second touchdown, I think he would have paid off for 20 points. But he did not, and Josh Jacobs scored 3 touchdowns. That was the thing holding him back against the Lions. So they scored a lot of points. It just didn't work out. In terms of upside, Love was just a floor play, kind of a letdown for me this week. But at number 8, I think there's a teardrop where now there's some risk. They could burn you. Wouldn't be shocked if you got a rough game. Less than 15 points for many of these players. But Caleb Williams comes in at number 8. He's been red hot the last couple games. With the new offensive coordinator now taking over as the head coach, I think Caleb will be even better. So I trust him. The second half is where he dominates, and he doesn't throw any turnovers either. If we can get some production in the first half, I think you could have a monster game where Caleb goes over 30 points in fantasy because he offers a lot of rushing yards, an average of 39 per game, and with not a single turnover in over a month, Caleb is very safe from a floor standpoint, and if it turns into a shootout against the Niners offense, maybe, just maybe, Caleb will have to throw for over 300 yards, and he gets back to elite. There have been some rough games. Whenever I've endorsed Caleb at a really high rate, he has really burned me, but there are some elite performances statistically from him, and I really love the fact that you're never getting any negative points from Caleb. If he does turn it over, it's pretty rare, and at this point, I really don't expect it to happen. So he's been a top 10 quarterback the last month. I think with 6 teams on bye, I think he's top 8. I would trust Caleb this week. I decided to start him over Goff on Thursday. Goff had a good game. I still think Caleb will play even better. Number 9, I have Russell Wilson versus Cleveland, who, despite a very good game last week, it was against the Bengals, and he does have a few diminished numbers over the course of his season with the Steelers. So he's maybe not like the safest top 10 play, but against Cleveland after the loss a couple weeks ago in the snow, I think they will bounce back in a major way. I definitely think they win. And George Pickens plays really well at home against Cleveland. I think he will find the end zone, and I think Freiermuth is also hitting his stride. I like Russell Wilson a lot. I think the floor is very safe, but if you told me Goff was going to score 24 points before I did these rankings, I would have probably ranked Goff above of Russ. So he probably doesn't go over 25, but I do think he's a very safe 18 plus type of quarterback. I do have Russ as a top 10 play, and I did have Goff as a top 10 play. I did tell you to start him, but more of a floor candidate. So he was a bit better than I expected. It's because that touchdown that went to Jahmyr Gibbs was a reception. If that was taken away, then I think my projection for Goff would have really paid off, and he would have had roughly 20, 18, 19 points. But no turnover either. Goff did not throw an interception last night. So Goff was really good, a little bit better than quarterback 10, but still I think this tier, if I could swap him with Jordan Love, it'd be nice, but I don't think he's going to be better than Caleb Williams. Number 11, still in the same tier, I have Matthew Stafford, who has been performing at a high rate lately, also in the top 12 at number 11, just behind Caleb Williams, averaging 18.1 points per game. And this is the projection. The green line at quarterback signifies 18 plus points, and I do think that's what Stafford gives you. Even though the Bills are a downgrade, the snow is a big reason why last week. At home against the Bills, they're going to have to score a lot, and Kyren Williams isn't quite paying off like crazy in the red zone on the ground. So I do think Stafford throws multiple touchdowns. I trust his floor. I think 250 and 2 touchdowns, maybe 1 pick, is the baseline for Stafford this week. I would trust him, maybe even 3 touchdowns and 300 yards if it turns into a shootout. There's some high upside for Stafford. But then we're dropping down a tier, and some of these players have actually been very disappointing. Some actually have been more reliable, but all of the factors this week have me a bit concerned. They're more like streamers overall. And at number 12, I do have Kyler Murray versus Seattle. This is a must-win. If they have any shot to win the division, they have to beat the Seahawks this week. Although they've lost 6 in a row to Seattle, Seattle lost 6 in a row to the Niners, and they did snap that losing streak earlier this year. So I do think Kyler does snap it himself tonight, on Sunday, and I do think he's a safe play, but he hasn't been great. Only the quarterback 24 the last 4 games, but an average of 14.8 points is kind of in that middle tier. Like, you have like 10 players all averaging between like 16 and a half and 14 points. So You could put him much lower, but it's very small nuances. I think he'll really contribute on the ground. The Arizona matchup is not that terrible. It's pretty average. And in his last 5 games versus Seattle, it's a division rivalry, he does average 16.6 points per game. 237 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 turnovers, 47 rushing yards. That's what I want to see. I'd like to see Kyler run it a lot. I think McBride's going to dominate. I think Marvin Harrison's going to be fine, but if Kyler runs for over 40 yards, you will get a good game. I think 16 plus points is my projection for Kyler. But then I have Jameis Winston, who's a true wild card. There's definitely some burn potential. The Steelers are a terrible matchup, and they definitely catch some interceptions from Jameis. But if they turn into pick six, he gets the ball back right away, and he's more incentivized to keep chucking it as he needs to crawl his way back down big. So Jameis has excellent game script every single week, no matter what. However, against Pittsburgh, I would downgrade him. I wouldn't expect almost 500 yards like he threw against Denver, but that was a tough matchup as well. Maybe it really just doesn't matter. With Cedric Tillman coming back, another weapon definitely makes this offense very, very deadly from a fantasy perspective. It is elite. So Jameis has that true league-winning upside. It could really work out. I am facing him this week, but I'm also starting the Steelers defense against him, and I think I could really benefit from that matchup. So buyer beware. It's truly like, how much risk are you willing to take? I think there's a safer floor with Kyler, but obviously higher upside with Jameis. There's a very low floor this week. I could see less than 10 points from Winston against the Steelers. I don't expect them to win this game. At 14, Mahomes has actually been really good the last month. The quarterback 6, averaging 19.4 points per game with 8 touchdowns, 2 turnovers. He is a good fantasy play. But against the Chargers, it's not a good matchup. If we look back to this first game against Jesse Minter's defense in week 4, he only put up 13 fantasy points, 245 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and 12 rushing yards. They did win the game. It was a low-scoring game. I expect a low score again this week. I really don't envision a shootout here. The Chargers have to win on defense, and I think they're going to keep it competitive no matter what. Maybe they don't win. Maybe the Chiefs do cruise to victory, but I don't expect them to blow them out with over 30 points. And that's why I think Mahomes is just a average quarterback this week. He'll be okay. I think 16 points is a fair projection, but I really don't see him going over 20. I just don't envision that happening. I see some turnovers, and unless Kelce just dominates, they might have to rely a bit on the run game themselves. So turnovers are a problem this week for Mahomes. I do have some concerns. I think he's just a floor play. But at quarterback 14, I understand if you think I'm way too low. He has been far better than this the last month. Number 15, I have Brock Purdy versus Chicago, and I'm genuinely concerned about his shoulder injury. He did miss a game 2 weeks ago, and then last week in the snow, he played like shit. So maybe it was just the weather. Maybe he didn't run because he didn't want to get hit. And if you take away the running stats and Christian McCaffrey, I really worry about the threats that this offense has. Like, they're almost never going to stack the box. Like, they're going to force Garendo to beat them, and I don't think Debo is playing at a level where, like, you really think this passing attack can burn everyone. Obviously, Kittle's going to score a touchdown. I really trust that. Jennings should have a fine game, but I just don't think there's that, like, added ceiling now that McCaffrey's gone, and Purdy probably doesn't run as much. It's kind of like that Jaden Daniels situation. Daniels was really limited on the ground after his rib injury. Purdy, I don't expect will test his shoulder given he hasn't gotten paid yet, and this season is probably in the tank. So while they're not mathematically eliminated, I think this game could emotionally eliminate them if it already hasn't happened yet, and I really worry about the floor bottoming out this week. I have some concerns with Purdy rest of season. If he is indeed banged up dramatically, he might just sit once they're actually eliminated if they lose to like the Rams after this week. So good luck with Purdy. I really have some concerns. I think they play on Thursday next week, and maybe they take it easy with the quarterback. Number 16 is actually really interesting to me. I think there's a safe floor from Levis, who has been putting up over 16 points himself the last month. The quarterback, 17 in that span, averaging 16.8 points. He gets a top 3 matchup against Jacksonville, one of the few upgrades to a quarterback that's actually at least league average this week. So Levis, I think, is a very interesting flyer. If you're super desperate, if maybe you have to replace Bo Nix, Jaden Daniels on bye, perhaps Levis is that dart throw. At quarterback 16, I envision a safe floor. I love the matchup for Calvin Ridley in a revenge spot. He should play well. Nick Westbrook-Akine always catches a touchdown. I see multiple touchdowns for Levis this week. He also has fewer turnovers lately, only 3 total turnovers the last 4 games. He has cleaned it up a lot since getting back on the field. His coach, I think, is a big help in that department. So I actually like Levis this week. I kind of wanted to rank him above Kyler Murray, but to put him above Mahomes would be insane, and I have diminished expectations for Mahomes. So let's pump the brakes. Let's put Levis below Purdy, but if he puts up top 10 numbers this week, I wouldn't be shocked. The matchup is top 3. Number 17, a big tier break going down to Geno Smith. Terrible matchup for him against Arizona. They are bottom 2 against the position. So don't expect more than 15 points. He's also averaging just 15.6 points per game against Arizona. In his last 5, he only has 7 touchdowns, 4 turnovers, and less than 230 passing yards on average. So this is a different system. Obviously, he throws it a lot more this year, but I do worry about it. I do not trust Arizona as a good matchup at all. I do think they'll limit him a lot. He's also only the quarterback 21 the last month, averaging 15.7. So don't expect anything different. I don't think he goes over 16. Geno, I think you can bench with confidence. But at number 18, I have Derek Carr at the Giants, who does get a relatively below average matchup. It's bottom 10, but I don't really care that much. With no Taysom Hill, they're going to have to rely on Derek Carr a lot more. So I do think there's some high upside if Alvin Kamara has a lot of a yak this week, but obviously Kamara could score like 3 touchdowns on the ground against the Giants, and you get jack fucking shit from Carr. But MVS is playing well. I think Juwan Johnson will have to step up. I think Carr could be okay this week, just like Geno. I still don't expect more than 16 points. At number 19, I'm definitely downgrading Justin Herbert with his offensive situation. Since Dobbins has gone down, the defenses play man against them, and they don't have enough man beaters to really elevate this passing game. So Herbert really only has Ladd McConkey and no one else. If Will Dissly gets shut down, I have no faith in Quentin Johnston stepping up, and Josh Palmer doesn't do very much himself. So I really worry if McConkey does indeed miss this game. He hasn't practiced this week. I'd really be concerned about Herbert. And against the Chiefs, I see a very low-scoring game. While it is a top 12 matchup, I don't think Herbert plays lights out with fewer weapons. So I'm concerned about this offense. I think they have to win just like last week. A bunch of field goals and on defense, hoping for a pick 6. I have some concerns. I did pick the Chargers to win, but even if they do, I doubt they go over 20 points on the scoreboard. So I'm going to bench him this week. I have some big concerns about their offense. Against the Chiefs in division, I will pass on Herbert, but he always steps up in this matchup. I wouldn't be shocked if he puts up an elite game. He's a great quarterback. Don't pretend like he can't put up top 10 numbers, even with the weapons he has. Maybe Josh Palmer goes over 100 yards for the 3rd time in his career against the Chiefs this week. At number 20, a player I was really wrong about last week, just like Herbert, I ranked both of these guys way too high. Cousins was ass last week. 4 interceptions against the Chargers, no touchdowns. And although he moved the ball well, damn, just terrible execution when it mattered most. And Cousins was brutal. A really terrible game. Maybe, just maybe, he was looking ahead too much to this week because obviously it's an important game for him. He gets his former team, the Vikings, and I'm sure he wants to play well. I really worry about it, though, against Brian Flores. So I think it's more of a Bijan game. I think they'll try and protect Cousins as much. I don't think they want to let him turn it over that much. So with only 3 touchdowns, 7 turnovers over his last 4 games, I have so many concerns with Cousins. Maybe he pays off, but if it's not against Tampa this season, he's been bad. He's been a terrible fantasy quarterback. I think the Achilles injury is really limiting him. Losing Kevin O'Connell as his play caller, I also think really hurt him as well. So I'll probably pass, but if you told me he put up over 300 yards against his former squad, I could envision it. Maybe finally Kyle Pitts goes over 100 yards. He's been irrelevant, though, lately. I doubt it. I'm going to bench Cousins this week at the Vikings. But then Cooper Rush gets a elite matchup number 1 this week, but are you really starting him? I doubt it. I don't know if Jake Ferguson returning is enough to elevate him inside the top 20. So at number 21, maybe, but it's kind of the same argument as Cousins. Like, yeah, there's a world that works out, but you really don't expect it to happen. I doubt I'd be picking up Cooper Rush off the waiver wire just to plug in for one game. And same goes for Aiden O'Connell, another great matchup that's wasted. It's top 2 against Tampa, but after the loss last week, I could see a very deflated team, and maybe he really sucks. He's been terrible this season, but last week was great. Actually, from a fantasy perspective, he was excellent. But when he had the job earlier in the year, he was awful. And maybe now that Minshew's out for the season, he does have like the monkey off his back. Maybe, just maybe, it works out. But just like Cooper Rush, are you really going to pick him up off the wire? I doubt it. I'll probably just leave him for someone else to fumble the bag with in their lineup. Mac Jones at 23, I think, is another tier break. At this point, I'm not going to press it, but a top 6 matchup for him, maybe, just maybe. The Tennessee Titans do give up some points to Mac Jones. He has Brian Thomas and Evan Engram. It could be worse, but then Drew Lock at number 24 versus the Saints, I'm not expecting much. He did have a lot of rushing yards last week, 57, but less than 200 passing yards, 2 turnovers. I'm going to ignore Lock against the Saints. And then I'm also ignoring Bryce Young at all costs at Philly. Terrible matchup. Eagles defense really scares me. Only if he gets some garbage time could Bryce Young be appealing. But no thank you. While he is a top 22 quarterback the last month, I will pass. No thank you on Bryce Young. And then lastly, I don't think I'm starting Aaron Rodgers this week. I have some heavy concerns that they will bench him for Tyrod Taylor. With no Breece Hall, I have a lot of concerns about this offense. So bench Aaron Rodgers at all costs. Yeah, maybe he'll throw a couple touchdowns like he did last week, but no thank you at all. I will ignore the Jets quarterback. So those are my quarterback rankings. Now let's pivot to tight end. Let's look at the position. These are the last 4 games and how these players have been performing in terms of average points at tight end. And number 1 should not really shock you at all. He's been so good. Brock Bowers is elite. The number 1 tight end as a rookie by far and away. Brock Bowers is a stud. And as a Charger fan, like, I think that's probably the only player I think you could make an argument should have been drafted at number 5 instead of Joe Alt for the Chargers. Like, damn, I can't believe he fell to the Raiders. He looks so good. Brock Bowers is insane, going to be a staple at the top in the elite tier. I think he's the tight end 1 for the next 5 years. Like, really, where else would it go? Especially if they draft like Shedeur Sanders or a great quarterback next season. Brock Bowers will be elite for a long time. So he's insane at number 1, 17.3. But then number 2 is Taysom Hill, who just went on IR, a season-ending knee injury. That's pretty rough. So we're going to be missing him. Obviously, Taysom has that 40-point game a couple weeks ago. But Jonnu Smith comes in number 3 at 16.7. So he's in that elite class with Brock Bowers last month. Jonnu Smith might be the league winner, given he's a waiver wire acquisition. As someone who has him in the subscriber league, I know how valuable he is. Like, over 100 yards is not a bad bet for Jonnu any given week. Tua loves him. I think he's overtaken Waddle on the depth chart, even potentially Tyreek Hill. Like, last week, Tyreek Hill scored a touchdown, and that pass was intended for Jonnu. It bounced off his hands, and it fell into Tyreek Hill's arms for a touchdown. It should have gone to Jonnu Smith. So he could have been even better after last week's touchdown debacle, but damn, Jonnu Smith is insane. If you have him, I think you need to keep rolling him out there. He's an elite option for sure. But how long will it last? Obviously, it's not what we expected. It could burn you at any time. But for the moment, I trust Tua's production, and I think his connection with Jonnu is legit. So keep starting him for sure. But next, there is a tier break dropping down about 3 points to the next guy, which is Trey McBride at 13.8, followed by George Kittle at 13.4. They've been elite all season. This is a pretty trustworthy number for those two. Expect about 13 points most week. A touchdown for Kittle, but then over 100 yards for McBride. And then the next player on the list is on bye. It's Mark Andrews, who almost always scores a touchdown. So 12 points, another top 10 tight end unavailable. And then the next name is Noah Gray. Obviously, that 2-game stretch with 4 touchdowns is a big factor here. And if you take it out of the equation, you're getting about 6 points without any touchdowns. So definitely a different type of player. I don't quite trust Noah Gray to maintain top 10 production. But the next player would be Zach Ertz, who has been really coming alive lately. A pretty go-to target, reliable weapon for Jaden Daniels in the red zone. I do trust Ertz at the moment. If he does score a touchdown, that safe floor about 6 points will go over double digits. But then the next player is David Njoku, who had a monster game last week, but was really bad 2 weeks ago against the Steelers. He gets the Steelers again this week, balancing that high risk, high reward equation with Njoku is a dicey decision. I think if you are trusting Njoku, it's all of the time. I don't think you really want to gamble with a backup with Njoku. Just go for it, and if it works out, you might get double-digit targets from him. But this next player probably will shock you. It's the New England Patriots tight end, Austin Hooper. It's not Hunter Henry. It's Austin Hooper, who's been scoring a lot of touchdowns lately, 2 over the last month, along with 50 yards per game. So he is a very legit weapon in this offense. Drake may kind of only trust the tight ends to throw the ball to. So if you need a backup for, let's say, Taysom Hill, or maybe just another tight end rest of season, I do think Austin Hooper is a interesting pickup. He's on bye this week, but still, I think he can help you. I kind of view him in the same vein as guys like Will Dissly, and, that's not that bad. That's definitely a contributor at the position. More of a streamer, obviously, but still not a bad bet to find the end zone, and is a factor, an often top 3, top 2 target for Drake May in New England. But then this next tier is probably the last safe bastion of hope at the position. A decent floor play from these players. League average is 8 points, and these guys give you about 8 to 9.5 themselves. Travis Kelce at 9.4, followed by Mike Gesicki, 9.3. Sam LaPorta at 8.9, Pat Freiermuth 8.8. Both of them are kind of touchdown dependent. But then Dallas Goedert, 8.3. He has not practiced this week. I do not expect him to play. He is considered week to week. And then TJ Hockenson at 8.2. A safe floor is what you can expect. And there's 2 players on bye. Theo Johnson, actually, he's on IR. He's out for the season. And then Dalton Schultz on bye at 7.9. He has been stepping up a bit more lately now that Nico Collins is on the field. Tank Dell has kind of sucked. But then Cade Otton has fallen off a bit, 7.8 points for him. And while he does get a good matchup this week, I don't trust Otton that much anymore. The rest of the players are all below league average by a decent margin, and Hunter Henry is on bye, but he's a pretty safe play. This 7.3 point average does come without any touchdowns in that span. Henry is the number 1 target in New England. I would trust him more than Austin Hooper, but Hooper has been vulturing him in the end zone. Then we have Will Dissly, Luke Schoonmaker, Evan Engram, Dalton Kincaid, Jatavian Sanders, Tucker Kraft, Noah Fant. That's kind of shocking. But then Juwan Johnson at 6.2, Chigo Conco, Cole Kmet, and Jake Ferguson above 5.5. And then the rest are all not really worth mentioning, except for one. The reason why I let this chart trickle down all the way down to 1.2 points is because only 2 spots above the last player, Adam Troutman, is where we find Kyle Pitts at 2.6 points. Kyle Pitts has been dog shit the last month. So I don't know what's going on. Maybe Michael Penix is going to be the savior, but if you've been relying on Kyle Pitts, I think you need to pivot off of him. He is a massive liability. I'd rather go Austin Hooper rest of season than Kyle Pitts. Maybe I'll eat those words, though, if Michael Penix does get him the ball. But if you told me Kirk Cousins remains the starter, I'd be benching Kyle Pitts no matter what. I'd rather go Hooper. And he's on bye this week. I'd rather have Hooper rest of season straight up than Kyle Pitts. But there are some matchup stats that we can also bring up. Let me show you that chart right here. These are the last 5 games. Clearly, there's an outlier here on this chart, and that would be the best matchup. The Las Vegas Raiders giving up 22.4 points per game. League average is 10.6, and obviously they do skew that number a lot. So huge advantage for Cade Otton this week against Las Vegas. I'll get more in depth on the details of these matchups, but I will reference just the high-end ones. The next best one would be Carolina against Grant Calcaterra, because Goddard is probably not going to play. Then Cincy against Jake Ferguson, if he suits up, if not Luke Schoonmaker, but I do think Ferguson will return to the field. Then it's Miami, who go up against Tyler Conklin. I doubt you're trusting Conklin this week. But then the Colts are on bye, followed by Tampa Bay, just below 13.5 points, and they get Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is going to dominate this week. An above average matchup, and he's a stud. Brock Bowers, clearly a must start. But then the Browns are also a good matchup. So Freiermuth has a upgrade this week, followed by Green Bay. LaPorta got an upgrade, but he didn't find the end zone last night. And then the Chiefs would be a decent upgrade for Will Dissly. I think the rest are all kind of negligible overall. I don't really care too much. But these bad ones, the negative matchups, sometimes they don't really matter at all. Like Detroit is a bad matchup, but they did give up a touchdown to Tucker Kraft. It could have been 2. The Chargers are a bad matchup, but Kelce always owns them in division, so don't care about that. The Cardinals going up against Fant, not really the best play in general, so who really cares? And then San Fran against Cole Kmet. Kmet's been terrible. I don't think anyone really trusts Kmet. But the only one that might be relevant is that Juwan Johnson is perhaps fool's gold this week. If the matchup against the Giants does persist as a bad one, then maybe Juwan Johnson still sucks, filling in for Taysom Hill. But I think that's it for the charts. Let's get into the rankings at tight end, where I obviously think Brock Bowers is the elite of the elite. The clear tight end 140 yards last week. You have to start him. He's insane. He also gets a top 5 matchup. Brock Bowers probably wins you your league this season at the tight end spot. But number 2, this next tier, I think are also locks in your lineup. Trey McBride, you know he's going to put up like close to 100 yards. He's the best go-to target for Kyler Murray. Every week he puts up numbers, high floor with McBride. And then at number 3, George Kittle's kind of the safest bet to find the end zone. Perhaps in the NFL, but definitely in San Francisco. Obviously, I do trust Kittle to keep up these numbers. Last week in the snow, I'm writing off. I think he'll bounce back in a big way, but he's not 100% healthy. Perhaps I am wrong about it, but he's been so good this season. I am trusting him. I'm keeping him in my lineup. I'm not benching George Kittle. But at number 4, maybe, just maybe, if you have Jonnu Smith, you would plug him in above George Kittle. I could understand doing that just because Jonnu's been so elite the last month. But I'm going to pump the brakes on that. I'm only going to rank him at number 4. You have to start Jonnu, but if you have Kittle, just put Jonnu in at the flex and get double digits from both of them. I trust Jonnu so much right now. I really think he's a potential league winner. If you don't have Brock Bowers, maybe the best other option would be Jonnu Smith because the draft capital is so minimal. He's a waiver wire guy. Brock Bowers was drafted like round 10 or later. Meanwhile, McBride and Kittle were both top 5, 6 round picks. So that's the difference in terms of the discount you're getting is massive. Obviously, the rest of your roster should be loaded if you've been streaming the position at tight end and you've landed on Jonnu Smith. But perhaps you also drafted Travis Kelce or another elite tight end and you trust Jonnu even more. I do think we dropped down a tier, but at number 5, I do have Kelce this week. Historically, he does own the Chargers. He's gone over 100 yards against them in 4 of his last 6 games. But against this new defense, he did only put up 89 yards, no touchdown on 7 catches in week 4. I do trust Kelce, though. He'll be great. He's averaging 9.4 targets the last 4 games, and although he has only 1 touchdown in that span, he has been vultured by Noah Gray a lot, still averaging 9.4 points. He's a top 12 tight end on a per-game basis in that span. 51 yards is his average. Kelce's a very safe floor play. I think this week the ceiling is unlocked. But at number 6, I did tell you to start LaPorta last night. He did not really pay off. No touchdown for him. Kind of a bummer, but with 2 touchdowns the week before, I was willing to bet on it and take that chance. Same argument with Tucker Kraft. I did tell you to start him. The matchup was bad, but he did find the end zone. He almost had 2 touchdowns. A bummer that Love missed him on that gimme that went over his head. But unfortunately, the ceiling didn't max out this week. Kraft's, though, still paid off a touchdown. You'll take it. Number 8, I think you're starting David Njoku, but he was terrible 2 weeks ago against the Steelers at home in the snow. He only had 9 yards and a 2-point conversion. He did drop a touchdown, but last week had double-digit targets. However, with Tillman coming back, perhaps he does diminish in that department. I still trust Jameis to be chucking it like crazy. So I would start David Njoku. I think you have to, and maybe he burns you again against the Steelers, but odds are he puts up a safe number. He averages 50 yards against them in his last 5, and that includes a couple weeks ago when he only had 9 yards. So Njoku usually plays well against the Steelers. I think he'll put up roughly 10 or so points against them this week, maybe even more if Jameis has to throw it another 50 plus times. At number 9, I trust the floor with TJ Hockenson. While Josh Oliver was vulturing some touchdowns from him, with Oliver unavailable, I definitely trust Hockenson to continue putting up safe numbers. And I think Darnold has a good game here against the Falcons. It's a good defense to exploit, and I trust the floor. Hockenson is very much involved. You should get 50 plus yards from Hockenson as well. So if I'm getting 6 catches and 60 yards, I'll take it. Definitely trust the floor with TJ Hockenson. Number 10, I think we're dropping down a tier. Now we're more so in the streaming conversation with 6 teams on bye. Number 10 is a bit misleading, but I do like Evan Engram a lot this week because of the matchup. Obviously, the Tennessee Titans don't really scare you in general, but in division, he actually owns this matchup. The last 5 games for Evan Engram against Tennessee, he does play very well. An average of 14.7 points per game on 10 targets, 7.4 catches for 74 yards, and 3 touchdowns in those 5 games. All 3 of those touchdowns also happened on the road. He plays even better in Tennessee as opposed to in Jacksonville. For some reason, he owns the Titans in Nashville. So maybe it happens again. Maybe you get what he's averaging against them. 14.7 points would be elite from Engram this week. The volume could be there. I wouldn't be shocked at all. But Mac Jones is the quarterback, and this game will have some rain. There's a potentially low score that could burn you a lot. So Engram is a bit less safe. I don't really expect touchdowns from him. So the upside, I think, is capped, but I could see 70 yards given he really dominates the Titans in this matchup. So good luck there. I'm definitely just looking into the historical numbers. If you just look at the last 4 weeks, he's only the tight end 19, averaging 6.7 points. So not a terrible floor. You could get burned, but I doubt you get less than 6. However, there is upside for more than 14 against Tennessee. That is his average. At number 11, I think I've lost some faith in Cade Otton. Now that Buck Irving is popping off and Evans is back, Otton is not going to get like 15 targets ever again. So Otton has not been as productive lately and only clinging to 1 touchdown, 41 yards per game. That's a lot more average. Just like Evan Engram, he's not averaging over 8 points. So not the best play. The matchup's actually the best on paper, though. The Raiders give up 6 touchdowns the last 5 games, along with 105 yards per game. So perhaps I am really underestimating Otton this week, but I have lost a lot of faith after the last few games. He's not been very good. And he's also had some really good matchups as well, and he hasn't paid off in them either. So last week against the Panthers was a top 5 matchup. It didn't matter. I don't think I have to start Otton. At number 11, he's just a low-end streamer. With 6 teams on bye, that's not the best ranking you could get on Otton. He used to be top 5 just a few weeks ago. Number 12, I like Pat Freiermuth's upside this week against Cleveland. I could see a touchdown for him. The matchup is top 6, and they do give up 70 yards per game to the position overall. If we look back to week 12, though, in the snow, he did have 59 yards, and that was pretty good. I could see it happening again. So a touchdown for him last week. He has 2 touchdowns the last month. I like Freiermuth quite a bit. I think he's a safe floor play, a good streaming option, and perhaps he's better than Engram and Otton. I could have ranked him top 10, but at number 12, I think you can start him with some confidence. I do like Pat Freiermuth this week from a floor standpoint. At 13, I'm not ready to quit on Dalton Kincaid, and he was practicing this week, so I do think he'll play. He's questionable, though. You want to make sure. And Knox has been stepping up without him. So with their injuries to the receivers, I do think if Kincaid is healthy, then he should still be a viable top 15 option, but he's been really underperforming this season, not what we expected. I get it if you want to bench him, but I would still go Kincaid over Noah Gray. I don't quite believe that Noah Gray is that legit. I don't see that many touchdowns this week against the Chargers, so you really need it to work out. And if it doesn't, you only get about 40 yards from Noah Gray. That's roughly the same as Kincaid. So not happy about this matchup either. It's bottom 2. So if you want to read into that downgrade, I only trust Kelce this week. I'm going to pass on Noah Gray. Number 14, though, if you're just chasing the touchdown, not the worst bet to make. But 15 through 20, I all view kind of identically. And at the top of this tier, you are really gambling. Last week was terrible. A bagel from Will Dissly, but against the Chiefs, he will need to step up if they have any chance of competing. I think they limit Ladd McConkey a lot, so Dissly is their number 2 target there, and perhaps he's really involved this week. But I have some concerns. I could see them limiting him as well. It's kind of the same thing with McConkey. If you limit Disley, there's not that many other weapons that Herbert trusts. So he could really be limited. Last week was terrible, and I have a hard time believing that Disley is like a weekly difference maker at the position. Some of his touchdowns and production do feel kind of fluky. So no thanks in general, but if you're desperate, there are a lot of players on bye. I understand if you are pivoting to Disley at 15, you could do a lot worse. But maybe I'm not respecting Jake Ferguson enough. He was my ride or die at the position entering the year, but obviously the last few games with a concussion, it's been easy to forget about him. With no Dak Prescott, that's a big red flag as well. So perhaps he completely overtakes Schoonmaker and is the clear number 2 target. Maybe the Bengals limit Lamb and Ferguson pops off. It's a good matchup for the quarterback against Cincinnati, but I really have no idea what you're going to get. Ferguson in his last 4 games is averaging 5.5 points, but Schoonmaker, his last 4, is averaging 6.9, and you would expect that production for Luke to go to Ferguson. So that's in the same vein as what Disley offers, about 7 points per game. If Ferguson slots in, that's what I was expecting from him as a floor entering the season. But Ferguson has not a single touchdown on the year. I don't see much upside for Ferguson in that department, and you're really just hoping on volume to carry you to 7-8 points. I don't envision more than 10. So I'm going to bench him. I want to see it with Cooper Rush before I endorse it. No thanks on Ferguson, but a very interesting pickup off the waiver wire if someone dropped him the last few weeks. At 17, I got Mike Gesicki, who has been stepping up. Actually, the tight end 12 with 9.3 points the last month. With 2 touchdowns, though, it is a bit touchdown dependent. So good luck with Gesicki against Dallas. It could be a shootout, but I doubt it. All goes to Gesicki. I think I only trust the receivers and the running back along with Burrow. In Cincinnati, if you're starting Gesicki, I think you're pretty desperate. I'll pass on Gesicki. But at 18, maybe Juwan Johnson really steps up with no Taysom Hill, but Taysom doesn't really play tight end traditionally. I don't know if that volume actually translates to going to Juwan, but there are so few targets for Derek Carr. At some point, the volume has to all be funneled in favor of Juwan. At 19 is where I rank Kyle Pitts, who I'm definitely not starting, but if he did bounce back and put up over like 50 yards this week, it wouldn't be that shocking. He was doing it consistently before the bye week. He's been ass since returning from the bye week. Number 20, I have Jatavian Sanders at Philadelphia, who is questionable, missed last week, but we saw Tommy Tremble really pay off, and Jatavian is averaging almost 40 yards the last month in this offense. So Bryce Young does move the ball, and Jatavian is one of their better options to throw it to. Beyond Thielen, I think the only one I would trust as a pass catcher there would be Jatavian, but at tight end 20, I think I'll pass. I doubt I'm going to trust him. But interestingly, Grant Calcaterra gets a really good matchup here against the Panthers. It's top 2, and maybe just maybe he does pay off. He has played okay filling in for Goddard, an average of 5.7 points in his last 4 games where Goddard was inactive, not on the field. So you could do worse than Calcaterra. The Panthers give up 78 yards per game to the position, along with 5 touchdowns the last 5 games. Maybe Grant Calcaterra does pay off, but I doubt it. I'm not going to bet on him. At 21, I'm going to pass. But 22 and 23 in the same vein could pay off, but I doubt it. Cole Kmet always has high upside, but has really been ignored the last couple months in this offense. Not a safe play at all. But Noah Fant actually has a decent floor for about 44 yards every week, but no touchdowns for him. No upside with Noah Fant. I will pass. But then these last few, just to fill out the rankings, I have Chigo Okonkwo at 24, followed by Tyler Conklin, Dawson Knox, Luke Schoonmaker, Daniel Bellinger, filling in for Theo Johnson, Colby Parkinson, and Foster Moreau at number 30. I think those are the only tight ends I would ever consider, but this late in the rankings, I'll definitely pass. Outside the top 20, you're really playing with fire. So those are my tight end rankings. Now let's finish up this video with defense, where I think the top 2 are clear, obvious starts. The Eagles against the Panthers, their defense is elite lately. The Panthers are typically a good matchup, but their offense has been better. There's a world where garbage time does kind of screw you over with the Eagles, but I would definitely trust him. I think against the Panthers, you have to start the Eagles this week. The number 2 defense for me would be the Steelers versus Cleveland, who I definitely expect to win against Jameis, and there's also some pick 6 upside. I kind of want to put the Steelers at number 1, but obviously Jameis can perform very well. If you started the Broncos last week, they had 2 pick sixes, but did give up over 500 yards. So that could burn you. It could turn into a shootout once again, just like the Broncos. There is some garbage time concerns for the Steelers and the Eagles matchup on the opposite side, but they're definitely the top two. I definitely think they're the highest options you can find at defense this week. But at number 3, I'm very tempted to start the Dolphins this week versus the Jets. I see no upside with no Breece Hall. That offense will struggle. For sure, start the Dolphins at home. Number 4, I got the Chiefs versus the Chargers, and the Chargers at the Chiefs back-to-back in the same game. Going to be a very low-scoring matchup, and I could see both defenses score to contribute on the scoreboard. So I love them this week. I definitely see a low-scoring game. Very high floor from both of them. Some high upside as well. We saw the Chargers have a pick 6 and 4 interceptions total last week on the Falcons. But the Chiefs have been reliable this season. I definitely trust them against a division rival. At number 6, I got the Vikings versus Atlanta, and I really have some concerns on Kirk Cousins. After last week, you could get a ton of turnovers yet again. So Vikings definitely a good defense. Top 6 this week. Then we drop down a tier. I think it's a little bit more risky, but there should be a low score, tight matchup for the Cardinals and Seahawks. This is a very critical game in division. The last one was raining, but it was a very low score as well, and I could see it happen again. I think the floor is very safe for both the Cardinals and Seahawks. They have good underrated defensive units this season, and I do think the Cardinals win. That is a tiebreaker in my opinion. So if you think the Seahawks win, go ahead and start them above Arizona, but I think both of them are top 8, very high, safe floor from Arizona and Seattle this week. At number 9, I could see a big blowout for the Saints, but maybe Malik Neighbors does pop off in garbage time. I could see the yards and late game points really cap the upside for the Saints. So just at number 9, a top 10 play. I would start them if I needed them, but maybe not the best play overall. I'd rather go Seattle or Arizona than New Orleans. But lastly, the Titans inside my top 10 are a safe play against Jacksonville and Mac Jones. Usually trust it, but maybe Brian Thomas does play well. It will be raining, so I do trust the Titans against Mac Jones. At number 11, I have a upset watch pegged for this game. I do think the Bears win, and they could really limit Brock Purdy. With no Christian McCaffrey, that offense could struggle. Purdy is banged up. His shoulder is not 100%. So Bears really talented, kind of hungry for a win. I like them a decent amount, but obviously the Niners could burn you. Then it's the Bucks, whose defense kind of sucks, but against Las Vegas, it's a good matchup. You have to rank them somewhere, so I do have them above average. But at 12 with 6 teams on bye, this ranking is a bit misleading. I have some concerns that the Bucks give up a lot of points, honestly. Their defense has been brutal in fantasy this year. At number 13, I have the Jaguars at Tennessee, and usually Levis turns it over, but not as much lately. So Jaguars, maybe I'm wrong about this, but then the Niners at Chicago versus Chicago, you would expect to be ranked a lot higher, but they're very banged up, a lot of injuries, and Caleb does not turn it over. So maybe they hold him to less than 20 points, but I don't think they get any turnovers to pad the numbers. I think the Niners are actually very misleading this week against Chicago. Not a good matchup for turnovers. But then I did tell you to bench the Packers and the Lions at 15-17, sandwiched around the Bills. And that game was a shootout. I think the Bills-Rams game is probably a shootout as well. But outside the top 17, I'm definitely benching these defenses. The Giants, Bengals, Browns, Falcons, and Cowboys. No thank you with them. Cowboys are interesting, but against Joe Burrow, I'll pass. I'd like to have them on the bench, though. They get the Panthers next week. And then defenses I'm definitely benching could give you negative points this week. The Raiders at Tampa Bay, the Jets at Miami, the Rams versus Buffalo, and lastly, the Panthers at Philly. Eagles are going to dominate. So those are my rankings this week at all 3 positions here on the screen. Quarterback, I would be starting the top 11 with some relative confidence. And I think the top 16 will all give you a safe 16-point floor in fantasy. But there are some tough matchups for guys like Winston and Mahomes. Even Purdy, they could burn you. Maybe Will Levis is actually the better play in that tier. But the top 11, I do trust to all go over 18 points this week. Starting with Geno at 17, I think I'll start passing overall at quarterback. But tight end is a bit rough outside the top 9. I think starting with Evan Engram, you're just kind of praying for touchdowns and high floors with yardage. But there are some interesting dart throws. I think Engram and Freiermuth, Cade Otton have the highest appeal this week. But maybe Will Dissly steps up again. Maybe Juwan Johnson does. Maybe Kyle Pitts finally bucks the terrible slump here. But overall, I think I'd be benching most tight ends outside the top 14. At defense, I would trust the top 10. And then if you have to, maybe you're going to be stuck with the Niners. But I'd rather go Bears, Cardinals, Seahawks. Those are the defenses I think I trust a bit more than the Bucks, Jags, and Niners. Those ones playing with fire. So that's it for me. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content. I'm going to call it done. I'll see you next time with all the injury report updates on Saturday. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.